part of who we are, part of our reflex action as we face the challenges of the world around us, because the world is really good at throwing challenges at us. And so to be able to have this set of wisdom for us, and reminding us that we're part of a different kingdom, not the kingdom of this world. We're part of a different kingdom. And so we give ourselves into this whole different way of being able to live. Caesar was the king of the Roman Empire, and he had very clear ways of being able to deal with people who crossed him and who challenged his authority and power. Not so for the followers of Jesus. So there's an opportunity for us to choose between Caesar and Jesus. What kind of a world is it that we want? What kind of a life is it that we want to live? And so we come to this part. It's the end of chapter 5, and so we're continuing to find that Jesus is pushing us toward the language of the heart. So we remember that he was echoing the commands of Moses. And so from last week it was, you've heard it said, and the command was, do not commit murder. But Jesus says, it's not about the outward act of murder, but it's about the condition of your heart. And so if you harbor anger in your heart towards a brother or sister, you've already committed murder. Or you've seen in the law of Moses that it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you, if you've got lust in your heart towards a brother or sister, then you've already committed adultery. So Jesus pushes us farther and farther and farther down into our hearts to examine our hearts, because he says that it's out of our hearts that flows everything that we think and everything that we do. And so this challenge for us, how is it that we allow Jesus to examine our hearts and replace our hearts with his heart, and to be preoccupied with the things of God. Now, so it's so important for us to be able to get this point, because as we go on in the Sermon on the Mount, he speaks in terms of hyperbole, exaggeration, in order to be able to make the point. And so it's very possible for us to miss it if we say, well, this we can't possibly apply this, in our life. How does this, how can you actually make rules for which to live? And we'll miss the entire thing. This language of Jesus has to do with the language of the heart. It has to do with the language of our passions and our identity, our ultimate fundamental commitment. And so we follow him in terms of not the details of spelling out exactly how everything needs to flow, but spelling out what the conditions and motivations of our hearts are. It's like, so at Christmas time, we always watch It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's Jimmy Stewart plays George Bailey. It's a marvelous movie. And at one point, he's falling in love with Mary. He wants to propose to her. He wants to get married, and he has to. So there's this romantic scene. They're out there at night, and there's this bright moon, full moon that's up there in the sky, and he's talking to her, and he says, "So Mary," he says, "so what do you want? What do you want?" I'll give you whatever it is that you want. You want the moon up there, Mary? Well, I'll go get a rope, and I'll lasso that thing, and I'll pull it down here for you. Would that be good, Mary? Would you like that? Well, that would take a really lot of rope to do that. But he's not obviously talking literally to do that, but he's talking about his heart, his commitment, his passion, his devotion to Mary, and what it is that he would do. And that passion gets translated into the particular details of how then they live out their life. His passion for Mary, how he lives out his passion for the community, how he lives out his passion for these institutions, the institution of the bank, and how it holds the investments of the community and its values and holds them all together. So this Jesus speaks in terms of passion and the kinds of our hearts that we are, because it forms the kinds of people that we are. And for him, it would have been critically important, because these are not abstract questions. Remember that the Jews are living with a military occupation. The Romans are there. And the Roman soldiers are not people you mess with. I mean, they really don't care a lot about these Jews, and so they're just as happy if somebody gives them a trouble to cut off a head or to hang them on a cross as to put up with any guff that they get. And so the people who are hearing Jesus' sermon are very clear that they're living these questions out on a daily basis as they look at these Romans who are out there, who are tormenting them and crushing them under their boots, and as they're listening to their religious leaders, who oftentimes are interested in feathering their own nests and not looking out for the welfare of the people. So all of these questions have very practical implications, and yet it starts not from the details, it starts from the heart. And so for the lesson for today, he says, you've heard it said, as he goes through this, you've heard it said in the law, in the Old Testament, he says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. So just quickly about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You know, that command is repeated several times in the Old Testament, and it's really kind of gruesome, is it? I mean, this idea of an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. If you were in a car accident and somehow you had an impact and you lost a tooth in the impact, the idea of going to court and saying to the judge, I want that guy's tooth because of what he did to me. That's a little gruesome. So what we do, we translate it. We're a capitalist society. We translate everything in terms of money. And so what you have to do is you have to write a check. Make sure that the cost of the injury is taken care of. But we need to remember that in the Old Testament, during the time that we're talking about, it could be a brutal time. And people were oftentimes interested in revenge, going after the person who had injured them. And so it starts with you hit me and I lose a tooth, and now all of a sudden I'm gonna strangle you, or I'm gonna come after you. I'm coming after your family. I was reading about the Hatfield and the McCoys, and it started out with a pig. So it's just a misunderstanding over a pig, and pretty soon bullets were flying, and the clans, it was outright warfare. And so in the wisdom of these ancient lawgivers, there was a sense, no, time out. We've got to cap this. So it's only, if you lose a tooth, you can't go after the entire jaw of the other guy. You have to, there's an equality of whatever it is that the injury is. And so if you lose a tooth, you can only take a tooth. If you lose an eye, you can only take an eye. So there's a sense of sanity that's tried to be imposed in the justice system. But even that, for Jesus, is not far enough. In the language of the heart, he says, no. If somebody injures you, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. Allow yourself to be able to be injured and not retaliate, but to retaliate good with evil, blessing for cursing, to be able to give love as opposed to the injury, retaliating in terms of the injury. And so then he goes through these different cases, these different steps, and so we can imagine them as stair steps for us, as Jesus just kind of continues to spell it out, these kinds of ways that we would have as followers of Jesus in trying to respond to the hurts of the world around us. So somebody slaps you on the cheek, then what do? You offer him the other cheek as well. If somebody wants to sue you and take your shirt from you, then what should you do? Hire a better lawyer? He says, no. He says, so not only give him your shirt, but give him your cloak as well, your coat. Now for them, even a poor person would have several changes of the shirt, of this undergarment. but the cloak was a valuable thing, and so it was something that even a poor person had in order to provide insulation from the night. And so they had that it served as their blanket. It was their security. It was what they always had with them. And so if you were a poor person and you had to surrender your cloak, the Old Testament said that you couldn't take somebody's cloak overnight. If they owed you their cloak, their coat, then you had to give it back to them at night so that they could at least be safe and make it through the night, and then they'd have to give it back to you the next day. But Jesus says, no, if somebody wants your shirt, give them not only your shirt, but do more. He says, give them your coat as well, and make yourself vulnerable out of an act of not retribution, but of extreme generosity. Give yourself, pour yourself out. He says, so if somebody presses you and tells you that you have to go with them 1 mile, and you have to carry a burden for 1 mile for them, then Jesus says, well, don't go just 1 mile, go 2 miles. Now that's a reference to during their time that Roman soldiers had the right to conscript anyone that they wanted in order to help them carry a load, a burden. And so if the Roman soldier has a load, some kind of package or something, some basket that needs to be carried, he could tap somebody on the shoulder, no matter where you're going or what you're doing, and he could conscript them into service. And he'd say, hey, you, pick that up and carry it with me, and they could go as far as 1 mile. So carry that for me for 1 mile. Now, I don't know how you are, but I tend to like to, if I'm doing something, I like to go and do what I'm doing. And the idea of being interrupted from that, even when Darla asks me to go and do something, when I'm trying to do something else, it's like, oh, really? Do I have to do it right now? Can't I go and I'll do it later, right? So this tendency that we have to grumble and complain when we're forced into service. But Jesus says, no. As a matter of the heart, when somebody forces you to do something that you don't want to do, with generosity, with open willingness, say, thank you for the opportunity of serving you, and pick up that thing and go with them, not 1 mile, but go double, go 2 miles, and bless them, encourage them, pray for them as you make it on your way. Well, that's a different approach to things, isn't it? And then Jesus says, so if somebody asks you for something, give it to them. When's the last time anybody asked you for anything? Do you always say yes? Do you always give them what they're asking for? Did any of you ever raise children before? Yeah. Raising children is refining the fine art of being able to say no, right? People ask us for things all the time, and so there's this innate desire in us to be able to kind of go through this calculation. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Will this person use this or abuse it? Do I want to give this up? Do I want to just hang on to it? But Jesus, he just cuts through all of the calculating, and he says, no. If somebody asks you for something, how do you respond? Out of generosity. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to give this to you and to give it to them with joy. This open-ended, this open heart that responds to the challenges of the moment, gushes gratitude, joy, and love. So do you see these steps that we're gradually climbing in this interest in following Jesus? And so then he comes to the top step and he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Oh, love your enemy. Love your enemy. Love your enemy. Boy, that is counterintuitive. And to just drive the point home, too, he says, pray for those who persecute you. The idea being that not just to pray for them, but to actually, Bonhoeffer says, that you're to take the position with God that you're actually advocating for the enemy, for the one who persecutes you. You're actually coming to God and asking for mercy and generosity to this guy who just hurt you. You're taking on the role of an advocate for them. How do we develop hearts that are so clearly counter to the way that we've been taught, to the ways that we just normally and naturally function? In 2006, I was on the staff at Church of the Good Samaritan in Paoli, Pennsylvania, which is on the western suburbs of Philadelphia. And I remember on one day, we got the news, it was screaming all across the country. In Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which was less than an hour west of us, there was a gunman who had gone into a single room classroom, and he shot dead four students who were there, all girls, and their teacher. And then as the police came, he committed suicide. Well, now for us, the idea of having a gunman who comes into a school and who shoots students, that's become, now in COVID, hopefully, that's been more subdued, but that had become a regular part of the news stream around our culture. So it's almost like another one. What was unusual about this one was the reaction of the community. This Amish community in central Pennsylvania, who responded immediately with declarations of forgiveness for the perpetrator, and who mobilized themselves out of compassion for the family of the shooter. And so from the newspaper articles, it says that immediately Amish community members were visited and were with the family, the widow. He was married and had 3 kids. They were with the widow, with the parents and the in-laws. One Amish man held the shooter's father for over an hour as he sobbed at what his son had done. The Amish set up a charitable fund for the family of the shooter. 30 members of that community attended the shooter's funeral. And the widow of the shooter was the only non-Amish person who was invited to be able to come in and to witness the funeral of those six victims. Later, the widow of this very depressed and ill man wrote an open letter to the community. She wrote, "Your love for our family has helped to provide the healing we so desperately need. Gifts that you've given have touched our hearts in a way no words can describe. Your compassion has reached beyond our family, beyond our community, and is changing our world. And for this, we sincerely thank you." How do you do that? How do you do that? Unless it is so ingrained in your bones, unless you have been so formed by this response to the ugliness and violence of the world, so formed by the counter example of Jesus, that what comes out of you naturally is just this generosity of love and compassion and support. So as we look at these different stair steps, these are all things that Jesus himself did. So Jesus, when he was slapped, he turned the other cheek. When somebody took Jesus' cloak, his shirt, they took all of his clothes, and he was crucified naked. When somebody asked him for something, even on the cross, one of the repentant people who was crucified with him asked him to remember him in the kingdom of God, and when he came into his kingdom, and Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." He from the cross, he cared for his mother, and he prayed as the soldiers drove the spikes into his hands, and as he hung on the cross with his final breath, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now, we have to choose the kind of world we want to live in, the kind of lives that we want to exhibit. Whether we want to follow Julius Caesar and his road, which is might makes right, and the power of force that dictates, or the kingdom of heaven and Jesus' example of the love of enemy and generosity of heart and gratitude and joy at the privilege of serving. You can't have both. It just changes our world and makes us different people. Different people. Phillips Brooks, the great hymn writer, he wrote "O Little Town of Bethlehem," but he was also a preacher in Philadelphia in the late 1800s, and he was a powerful preacher, and he wrote this: "Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. Then the doing of your work shall be no miracle, but you yourself shall be a miracle. Every day you shall wonder at yourself, at the richness of life which has come to you by the grace of God." It is the gift that is given to us, the opportunity in this very broken world to be able to rethink our thinking about how it is we respond to the jagged edges that are presented to us. How is it that we respond with a different heart and with generosity, with gratitude, with forgiveness, with grace, and with sacrificial love that brings healing and wholeness and provides hope to people who long to know that such a thing is even possible. Amen.